Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. Our goal here is to review the market generated information in a holistic fashion. We're intimately following the auction's narrative of both ES and NQ. If we have time, we'll theorize and add additional commentary towards the end. There's an uploaded recording of the DOM session today. Check it out if you like. All right, so where's the market coming from and what is price trying to accomplish? So we'll look at the S&P 500. Again, this is earnings week. So it's been a bit chaotic before and after the bell. Today there was Microsoft, Meta, Coinbase, and Starbucks at least at the end, and then Caterpillar and Eli Lilly. So for healthcare and industrials for earlier in the day. Just tomorrow, what is this? Energy, bank, finance, and more tech. So again, we had earnings to kind of be on the lookout for, and then we have this other data, just the GDP, the ADP employment, and impending home sales. Sorry, I was just trying to recall and see if there was a SOC, but we'll look at that later. So again, we do have some earnings that was coming out today, and then that light data. Don't forget that on the weekly candle, the previous week, bit of an engulfing candle here, closing under the low. So again, we have a bit of a fear kind of going on. Not too fearful, but definitely buyers are a little more hesitant this week. Yesterday, we did break the prior day's low, but we still closed higher. Essentially, the same case for the NQ. Their goal was really just to make a higher high and ideally a higher low. The NQ made a higher high, but they made a lower low as well. Somewhat similar for the S&P 500 with their higher high, but they still close within their range. Extremely weak though. You can notice we're already trading a bit lower. You can see how the earnings went. So I mean, they got their higher high. NQ is a little bit it's not unexpected for the NQ to have that low, just given how whippy they can be. So we'll actually look at that same NASDAQ. We can see they had 316 points of range. The volume is picking up again as it has been Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. From Tuesday to Wednesday. Remember yesterday we had that high delta, so we are kind of curious on what was going to happen with that. And that was essentially just reversed. And we've already broken that low from yesterday, so I'm not sure what we want to make of this now. But increased delta, excuse me, minimum delta is down to 6,500 and increase of volume with a nice range at 316. So interesting. This is about a normal profile, possibly multi-distributed or just a bigger belly, with the majority of the action taken in the middle of the range for the day. Somewhat similar to the S&P 500, but much more jagged. Price discovery on both sides. Not much trading at the lower portions and not much trading at the higher portions as well. But the VPOC was a little higher, 53 points of range, still increase of volume from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the same thing with the delta. Except yesterday they didn't have as strong as the buyer delta, but they had the same amount of sellers that was very forceful today. So just selling across the board. So it's important to understand that these earnings really can move these sectors around, especially some of the heavy hitters. You can see that we finished negative 33 basis points today. If you look at the DOM recording for today, you'll see me flipping through the sectors, and you can see that Eli Lilly was down like 12% for the day. They finished negative 6% if I recall, but just XLV, the healthcare, was getting their butt kicked today. But they finished pretty well, just only negative 20 basis points. So really good job for them. What was surprising was the tech, and that came from Supermicro Computer. Some important news that came out today. While they may not be very well weighted, it was just very much of the downside for these couple of companies. The heavy hitters actually did fairly decent today. They're only down, 1.5%. They were good at first, but they really turned over later in the day. I'm not exactly sure what caused that, and if it was related to the super micro computer. Other than that, shout out to the banks for holding it down, finishing 45 basis points alongside communications. Google just reported not too long ago, alongside Meta. Are they showing on here? Yeah, Meta finished about unchanged, and Google still rising from the yesterday's action that they had. I mean, other than that, very interesting from the sector. We're not done. We have more tech earnings coming for tomorrow. So at least for the past 5 days, they are still positive. So I'm curious to see how they're going to respond tomorrow, especially the consumer discretionary. So notice that they were only down 14%. Excuse me, 14 basis points. So they have been the secret release of the past 5 days, but not so much for the past month. So I think discretionary is going to be really important tomorrow. I'm speaking about Amazon for the most part, so we really want to keep a good eye on that. I think that can help the S&P 500 really propel itself when you have technology, finances, and consumer discretionary alongside communication services. Now, that way, healthcare can really just kind of sell off, and we really won't notice it too much. So yeah, I know that was a lot for the sectors, but I do like paying attention to those. So just bear with me. All right. So we'll look at the NQ for the market profile. There was no singles created today. We have the monthly composite here. And again, if we just zoom out, we know we have the all important VPOC zone from the composite, which is the 250s, 20K 250s, and then this VPOC zone for the month, which is around the, let's call it 20K 400. Recently, the NQ wanted to push above these 700s and ideally find their way up to these 840s. That's a bit of a stretch, and you can see that they're trying, yesterday or at least this week, and especially today. But just no upside momentum, really hitting our ceiling, hitting our head on the ceilings, lower highs and lower lows for the whole day. So it just seems like we may be pulling up and then just pulling back down to these 500, seeing if we can find some support. Ideally, technology the technology side really wants to hold these 400s. Last line defense would be these 300s, and then really have a nice pushback into, so they can ideally go for these 800s because their all-time highs is not too far away. Actually, since they're right here, their all-time highs is about 4% away. That isn't much for the NQ. Not much at all. All right, and then we have our S&P 500. So they have their line in the sand below these 5900s at the 5890s. And you can see that our weekly profile, the VPOC is near the highs. And we had more of that for today. And they tried to push through. And they too hit their head. And then lower highs and lower lows for the remainder of the day. So appears to be getting rejected. And then they were unable to rely on the earnings to propel them up near the all-time highs. They still have one more try when it comes for the earnings for tomorrow. And then we can't forget the non-farm payrolls for Friday. Same thing here for the 138 minute candles. Take a quick look at that. Really nothing to glance at here. We are retesting this zone. Those same 400s that they want to protect, and it seems that they may be possibly having a bounce now in this overnight. Same situation here for the ES, except theirs is the 5830s, which is very important. All right, and then we'll look at the footprint for the day. This is the NQ. We had a big sell-off at first, and then really pushed up, and then we just stopped. Lower highs and lower low from this second bar. You can see the delta was extremely negative, and then it flipped, went extremely positive, met some sellers, and then those sellers really pushed down, continued to push down, but didn't really get too much progress, only 85 points of range. And then the buyers tried once more, found a bunch of sellers. You can see the majority of the buyers are here near this top, and the sellers really took over, really pushed it down for the remainder of the day. All right, we will look at the ES. Same situation, extremely negative delta, flipped and turned positive, completely on the other side. Sellers continued, but really got no progress, even closing at a doji with all the downside for the wick had all nothing but downside, no upside pressure. So sellers are present and they're really trying. This next round, buyers ended up being really aggressive, pushing through the VPOC at the top, but they had no progress. So we come back into this range. Sellers really put their foot on the gas, had to cover a little bit, maybe some new money buyers. Those new money buyers had to liquidate on top of new money shorts, we would imagine. And that's pretty much it for today. All right. So we'll look at the 3-minute candles. All right. So we'll ignore what's happening now so we can focus on what happened for today. Okay. So again, we had our big rally for yesterday. It was much stronger on the NQ. We ended up pushing upwards. Again, that same area that we're looking at, they're kind of just in thin air, at least for the Nasdaq. That is, the S&P 500 is definitely at a VPOC zone for the month, and just heavy resistance that's up here. A lot of activity. People may need to rebalance their portfolios. Who knows? But just no progress once we hit the top of that zone, and then just really started selling off, created a new low. As we made the new low, we reached back up to this VWAP, couldn't really get away from the VWAP, found another new leg lower, and we ended up opening the RTH near the overnight lows. For the NQ, same situation. All right. Because I want to do. Hold on, just let me double check something. Just bear with me. Oh, okay, I got it. I was making sure I had my studies correct. Okay, cool. So I can just put this back in horizontal. Now I will leave it in vertical. All right, so we have our session here. You can see that the overnight low is here and the overnight high is way up there. Same situation overnight. Overnight high is up here and the overnight low is right below the open. So again, looking at the S&P 500, actually let's do this. Okay, that's much better. So I'm just making sure we don't have the old stats listed. Okay, perfect. All right, so we open sideways. We have legs down. Look at this S&P 500. We open sideways, possibly open auction until we pick a direction and then go down, break that overnight low, and actually close below it. Once we close below, we had a full body bar, and we had more continuation to the downside. Again, we're inside of the prior day's range. As we're inside the prior day's range, specifically the prior IB mid, we had a very aggressive engulfing and pushing through back into, really headed into the overnight low. There was no pullback, no stopping at all, just extremely violent and sharp, headed back into these 8200 zone. that we have. It's about 10 points between this zone. End up hitting our head. No real new highs. The one time we did push above, we immediately started making lower highs and lower lows. Can't really expect to get in short there. So you want to see how we perform on a retest. We have the lower low there to the full session VWAP, came back down to the RTH VWAP, pushing through, creating a new high, but then there's no real continuation in that time frame. And same behavior really for the NQ, except they're a little weaker. Their impulse was not as sharp to the downside. Excuse me, their impulse to the downside was a little sharper, and their move back upwards took them 3 bars to climb back up. Really, to get back to their overnight low, it took them really 5 bars. It took the S&P 500 2. So again, a little sluggish. They push up 2, and they finally make their new high, and they are stuck at this overnight. I mean, they're stuck at this initial balance high. They pull back down to the overnight low, pull back down to the IB mid, and then this is where they find their way back to the IB high, battling with this former pivot area for the RTH. And then that's where we find both products here, here, and here. The fact that the S&P 500 has the weak XLK and now tech is weak, this made sense for us, at least in real time, and we ended up initiating short here once more with a stop really above this zone for the most part. They ended up having a new sell leg lower, trending below the 5 smoothing average, the first close above, engulfed, and then we find our way back down to the open. No support at the open, engulfed through, and then we found some support at the IB mid, and then just really traded between the IB mid and then the high under these VWAP bands, and essentially just closed lower for the day. The earnings paid no dividends. They only created a new low, pushing to the IB mid, which appeared to have a lid on it, and then they closed right at their initial balance low to end the session and closed below it for the NQ. If we had to look for any type of setups, we did trade some of this in real time, as we mentioned. Looking in hindsight, this isn't really a setup for us for a long, but we had took it anyways. The reason that we went long for the ES here was that we pulled back into the prior day's range, which again had a crap ton of sellers that was here from the prior day. So this was their opportunity for them to get out. We actually ended up buying somewhere near the open, a bit front running, but definitely in real time, you're buying at the prior day's range where a lot of people were stuck and surprised and stuck rather. There was no real pullback to get into this, just to be perfectly honest. Even looking at the 1 minute candles for you to get in on the short side, it only made sense for once we revisited here. I can see me possibly getting in here with a tight stop and being stomped out. But really, once they push through and you had ample time for you to kind of get in, you would just have to have a little bit of a risk, about 4 or 5 points, really targeting that open, which is what we did. And then that was pretty much it for the remainder of the day. Really not too much. For the NQ, they essentially look the same. They pull back to the prior day's overnight high, just short of their prior IB high from the prior day. So again, they were looking a bit stronger than the ES was. Now that I look at it, though the price action for the RTH was definitely a bit weaker, not as impulsive as they typically are. Pull it down. You had a little more time to possibly get in here on the NQ, though I would imagine this felt a bit uncomfortable, especially here once they reclaimed this 5 smoothing average, pulled back below it, engulfed. You had an opportunity to possibly get in there on any kind of retest, 1, 2, 3, or just even on this here, given the way that the S&P 500 was pushing to the upside. Ideally targeting that open, risking your downside down here, or at least the impulse candle, at least for myself. All right, we'll go ahead and cut it there. Again, this was a pretty simple day. Not much has changed. if we're not including the overnight session. But it is pretty important that, well, it's important that the S&P 500 had a very weak earnings and they closed near their lows. The last time we saw this, if I recall, I think it was something to do with Tesla. And was it Tesla? It actually may have been Meta. I'm not sure, but it was some company, pretty big tech earnings. They ended up closing near their lows, like that, the IB low, and then there was like a big sell off to start the overnight session. So I tried to do a possible long near the lows during this gap down, but again, we don't want to make this about the next session, so I'll kind of leave it theorizing at least for now. But other than that, we'll give the buyers on the S&P 500 a 4 or 5. The fact that they were able to trap a lot of sellers in here and try to support and finish near the IB mid, I mean the IB low, good job. There was no trading below the IB low for the most part. All that happened in the next session. Then Q will give them maybe like a 3 or 4, but they were able, all of this happened relative to their prior days IB mid from yesterday, where the S&P 500, they hit that in the first, 15, the first 15 minutes. It took the NQ the whole day for them to reach their prior days IB mid. All right, so we'll go ahead and leave it at that. Thanks for watching and enjoy your night.